know what the funniest thing about Europe is?
What?
It's the little differences. I mean, they got the same shit over there that they got here, but it's just there. It's a little different.
Example?
All right, well, you can walk into a movie theater in Amsterdam and buy a beer. And I don't mean just like no paper cup. I'm talking about a glass of beer. And in Paris, you can buy a beer in McDonald's. And you know what they call a quarter pounder with cheese in Paris?
They don't call it a quarter pounder with cheese?
Oh, man, they got the metric system. They wouldn't know what the fuck a quarter pounder is.
And what do they call it?
They call it Royale with cheese.
Royale with cheese.
That's right.
What do they call a Big Mac?
Big Mac's a Big Mac, but they call it Le Big Mac.
Le Big Mac. What do they call a Whopper?
I don't know. I didn't go on a Burger King.
John Travolta's turn as Vincent Vega in 1994's Pulp Fiction revitalized his career. His character has returned to the U.S. after a 3-year stay in Europe, mostly in Amsterdam. In this memorable scene, he colorfully explains to Jules, played by Samuel L. Jackson, how Europe is similar yet different. While Vincent's amusing explanation gave us one of the great movie quotes of all time, it digs into the very real differences in culture and customer expectations between America and Europe. And don't put the European continent in one bucket when it comes to customer experience, says Frances Chapireau. What works in one country may not in another. As a native Brit living and working in Germany, she's keenly aware of how current CX best practices don't always apply. This week on Next in Queue, we discuss cultural differences in customer experience, data protection and privacy in Germany, trust and relationship building in business, customer experience maturity across regions, why customer feedback surveys are far from dead, Lego's serious play and creative facilitation, and language and cultural nuances in Germany. Let's get to it. Frances Chapireau, Sie sind der Nächste in der Warteschlange. Or, you're next in queue. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Yeah, well, thank you. Very well. Thank you for having me.
So, I introduced you in German, but you clearly do not sound German with that accent. You are a founder of your own company called Build CX. You're a CX consultant. You're a Lego serious play facilitator, but you are not in the UK. Where in the world are you?
Yeah, so I am currently based in Mainz in Germany. I am indeed from the UK, but we came across here 7 years ago now. 7, yeah.
So what brought you to Germany?
Oh, this is an interesting question. Mainly, honestly, my husband's job, but we both had in common. So I studied German, so I could already speak German, and he is half German and half French, hence the name. And yeah, so we were thinking that where we might want to go, and thought, well, why don't we try out Germany for a few years? You know, I lived here for a year as a student, not here in Mainz, but not far away in Heidelberg. And yeah, we thought, yeah, why not? Anyway, we're still here 7 years later. So yeah, we really like it here. And yeah, it's been an interesting period, like adjusting obviously to life here.
Yeah, I would imagine that it's very different. I haven't been to Mainz or even that side of Germany. but I have been to Berlin, and I know for a fact that there are some significant cultural differences between the US and Germany, between the UK and Germany. And that's one of the topics that I want to tackle today is just talking about how cultural differences impact customer experience. And you didn't begin your career consulting in CX in Germany. You've been a consultant with some big names in the past. What have you seen over the last 7 years that has surprised you?
Oh, that is a good question. Um, Surprised is maybe I'm not surprised, but the thing that hits me most being in Germany is I don't want to go straight in with something negative, but the in terms of customer experience, digitalization and this kind of thing, there I think it wouldn't be unfair to say Germany isn't well, certainly isn't ahead. And coming across from the UK, where a lot of things, a lot of sort of, for example, government services. They've done a lot to create quite good online forms, and I don't know, when you're traveling around London, you've got your Oyster card, and lots of payments contactless and all of this. And in Germany, for example, there's a bit of a reputation, I suppose, for, I don't know, it's a bit stereotypical, but like German bureaucracy and things, but there was still a lot of paper forms to fill out. And it's a big joke, I think, over here. A lot of people joke about still faxing things to people. And yeah, I think it's things like paying in cash is still really big. And I was struck. Actually, we went I was lucky enough to go to Australia a couple of years ago, and we was in Sydney and managed to survive 2.5 weeks with no cash at all. You could pay for everything, even the tiniest amount. Even those sort of toys you have in shopping centres where you sit your kid in it. It's like shaped like a train or whatever, and they ride in it for like a minute. Like even those had like a little contactless thing on it. So. And then in Germany, that's not really the case. It's very common to find yourself either needing to pay cash or at least with what they call an EC-Karte, which is kind of a special German bank card that certainly most tourists don't have and often find themselves kind of stuck. So I don't know. So I mean, I have to be aware. I'm probably going to make some sweeping generalizations here, which is obviously not great, but maybe inevitable. But I think, yeah, when we're talking about sort of differences in customer experience and culture, I think there is a different culture here, and different things are more important. So again, something that didn't surprise me, but something I knew, but like I've really experienced it myself, was that I think on the whole, people in Germany are or companies in Germany are much more focused on things like data protection, certainly compared to the US, but even compared to the UK. Data privacy and this kind of thing, that is huge. You can't go in as a a vendor, or like certainly for like software, and in our space, collecting customer data and handling customer data is something we do. And that is that's a huge topic you've got to get right. Protecting sort of personal information and so on. And so and that's a big thing. So again, maybe not surprising, but like you do experience it, and you almost can't go anywhere or sign up to anything without signing a data protection form, that you've read and you've understood, So yeah, definitely lots of differences. Yeah.
Having been to Germany, I can absolutely attest that it is still very much a cash society. As a person who rarely carries cash, in fact, just yesterday, my wife cracked a joke because I had my money clip out and it had a single dollar in it. And she was like, "Oh, you're Mr. Moneybags, you're rich," because I just don't carry cash, right? But Germany is very different. And you absolutely need to have cash, even as a tourist, to get around and do things. And I think the data protection piece too, when you think about cultural differences, a lot of times it's history that influences how we view things. And so Germany, as many people know, has had a pretty storied history. Some of that past being quite checkered, and Germans are leery of relying too much on banks for money. They absolutely want to have cash available, and certainly the data protection, the privacy, strikes me as something that Americans, quite honestly, just don't think enough about it. And I imagine the Germans probably think maybe a little more than necessary. They probably swing the other direction. And a lot of that is just based off of our history and the lens through which we view the world. So I find that to be very fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And those two issues, of course, are linked as well. So a lot of people say, well, I don't want to use a card, then everyone will know, I don't want people knowing where I'm shopping, what I'm doing. Even though they've got nothing to hide, it's just, so these things that go together very much. And I think it's interesting when you look at, when you talk about customer experience and differences between US and Europe, and obviously I can talk, and I will talk mainly about Germany, that I think, you only realize as well, even within Europe, how different even neighboring countries are. And as you say, like based on history and like there were big cultural differences. And read an article a couple of weeks ago that was put out by the European Customer Experience Organization. And they were comparing, I think, 6 different markets. And like one of the things they pulled, they had a section on Germany, and like I could kind of only agree, one of the things is that, trust is a big issue. So again, that links to those things. I'm trusting you with my data. I'm trusting, you with my money, whatever. I think trust is like a huge thing, and just the way relationships are built in Germany is a bit different too. And I think that can often sort of maybe take Anglo-American companies by surprise, and you see that not only in working relationships, but also in sort of just in friendships, here, like these are built over time, but then, once they're in place, they're really solid and people are really reliable, so that I think it's really interesting. And then of course you've got the other thing, the very stereotypical thing that, Germany is a land of sort of engineers and makers, and, and there's a focus on sort of technical excellence, and things have to be robust and accurate, and they maybe like their documentation more than and that was something I said in this paper. That obviously, the 2 countries I could obviously compare best were Germany and UK. And they were saying sort of maybe in the UK, people are a bit more pragmatic. The kind of conversations you have then are sort of a bit different, and I think it's really interesting then when you're looking at customer experience, and you sort of we chatted about this and what we talk about today, and I was sort of thinking that you've got, in terms of customer experience, you've got the actual state of customer experiences in like what customers receiving, and there, for example, you can also say that compared to the US, you've got maybe a bit more of a service culture is like really obvious in the US, and maybe less so sort of here, or it's expressed very differently. But then you've also got the approach, from companies to like how they go about doing CX. And that's also, I think, quite different. And again, also quite sort of based on sort of cultural differences. And then you've got the whole discourse around customer experience and how people like you and me might write about it on LinkedIn or whatever, and the kind of things that get talked about at conferences. And again, I think that's different. So I think there's these 3 nice sections to it, like the actual customer experience, the approach to it, and then, how we talk about it and where we're at in how we think about it, I think is the maturity levels, if you like, or where you are along that sort of adoption curve, I think is quite different.
When you mentioned documentation, I can tell you from personal experience, having supported a company based in Germany, that the documentation is out of this world. Nobody documents like the Germans. They have this down to a science, particularly if it's technical in nature.
Yes.
You will have no lack of reference material to get to. And that is both a joy, but also a bit shocking if you're not used to that, because it's so uncommon in businesses based in other countries.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, anyone doing business in Germany will encounter this. If you're US or UK company, um, you have to be aware, and each different, all the different countries in Europe, they'll have their differences. And I think it's very important not to see them as like Europe as a block in a way, because it's culturally quite different.
Yeah. I think this serves as an important reminder that we think of CX as kind of this thing that's the same everywhere, and we speak about it sometimes in I don't want to even say monolithic terms, but through American eyes often.
Mm.
And American companies do business in other countries all the time, and understanding how your customers in different cultures will react to how you execute is critical, because what may be not just acceptable, but preferred from an American may come across wildly different to someone else in another country from another culture. And that could have a huge impact to your bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've been, I don't want to say always wary. I have become wary of the concept of best practice, because I mean, even within the same culture, and the business context is crucial, right? I think what works in company A, you can't necessarily just translate into company B, C, and D. Even within one country, one industry, whatever. But then when you take that across borders, it becomes even more so. So I think that understanding that context of what kind of company this is, where they're at. I mean, absolutely, you can't expect it to just translate it across. And I think it's interesting in the CX space, because the US has been kind of ahead, whether it naturally already had a bit this tendency towards sort of customer orientation and very, very sort of service mindset, but also kind of the thinking, the literature, everything. Like it's kind of, it's English, and it started, like the first sort of, I know, as these programs, voice of customer programs got speed, and you look at the companies that have sprung up to support those, and just a lot of it is US based, and going back to I was looking this up earlier because I couldn't remember what it was. Pine and Gilmore, the experience economy, and it was like 1998. And then I think we were talking about it when I started in market research around sort of 2010 time, but we were still there talking about sort of customer satisfaction and loyalty more than customer experience, which has now become like the term. And I think that term customer experience really took off in around the 2010s, I suppose, in the UK. And I think Germany, for example, is even behind that in terms of just in terms of the adoption of the ideas. And definitely bigger companies, like the big corporates, they've they get it, as it were, like they've got their customer experience teams in place and so on. But certainly not the majority of companies, I would say. It's just that adoption. So if you think about CX maturity, it's kind of, I feel like it's kind of started in the US, and then the UK caught up, and now sort of Germany and rest of Europe is, catching up there, and so again, everyone's got to go, I think, through this kind of adoption curve, if you like, of understanding what is this and how does this work in our context, what does good customer experience look like in our context, and so on. And then you're almost looking to the US, where I actually think, if anything, I'm seeing a bit like there's this Gartner hype curve, right? And there's, I've written it down because I knew I'd forget. There's like the peak. So you have this trigger, right? And then you've got this peak of inflated expectations and then this trough of disillusionment. And I feel like a lot of customer experience programs in the US are now going through this trough of disillusionment. I don't know. Perhaps I'm hearing lots of negativity about, are these programs really working? Are they delivering? Lots of kind of, we don't like surveys, sentiment. And I don't know. And I feel like we're not, we get a bit of that from the UK also, but I feel like we're not there in Germany yet. And so it's almost like if you look to the US, you'd almost give up here before you really started. I don't know, like, it's a bit hard to explain, but I think, I think it's dangerous, to look at, what's working in the US or what the current situation in the US is, and then to say, well, okay, well, let's just translate that over here. I think at the minute sort of companies are working, as I say, working through, what does that mean for us and in our context? And I know you and I spoke a while ago, and I mentioned this concept in the German economy, like the real backbone of the German economy is this, there's a rather large group, I think it's like 99% of companies, that is what they call the Mittelstand. And it's just like a really German thing. I tried to research it a bit because I believe in the US, a similar proportion of companies are kind of small, medium companies, but Mittelstand in Germany, like it really means something quite specific. These are typically family-run companies over multiple generations. There'll be sort of planning succession, handing it on to the next generation. I think very long term, but they're very specialized often, often there's very technical sort of manufacturing companies, for example, and it means something specific. And then so I think it's very difficult to say that what works in a big corporate is maybe you can't also translate that to a German company in this Mittelstand where it's run differently. They have kind of different principles. I think by their nature are quite customer focused in that they have, I think, a laser sort of sharp focus on understanding, knowing who are their customers. And I wish, and maybe it's the book I haven't written yet, that there would be more examples actually about customer experience from European and German, for example, companies, because all the examples also come from the US, right? Like when you look at this is how you do CX, and it's like, well, maybe we need some more, European examples.
There are a couple of things that I want to unpack there. And I do think that I have said for a long time that I think companies who are trying to execute, and when I say companies, I mean larger companies that are trying to execute really good CX, are often trying to replicate the small town family owned business that knows you when you walk in the door, and they knew your parents and they know your siblings because it's a small community, and that's just the way it works. And I grew up in a small community, and that's just how things operate. And it sounds to me like that's often how things operate in Germany with a lot of businesses versus where I think we are in America, which is almost everything feels like it's become corporate. Big companies run everything, and you just don't see, even though there are tons of small businesses, it feels different here, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult for me to speak to US because I don't know it so well, but I think certainly, again, it's characteristic of this Mittelstand that they are quite local also, like, and or they focus, on sort of serving other local sort of businesses. And you have companies, as I say, serving like very specific niches. It would be the company that makes a specific part for an aeroplane or something,
Right.
and maybe that's all they do, or or they supply a specific part for heating systems. I don't know what, like, and they will be not well known to the general public at all, but they will be absolutely known in that industry for what they do, as maybe even being like world-class leading. They even call them, like I found that recently they've got a term for this. I kept coming across this term, hidden champions. And it's basically like this sort of world-class companies that no one, they're not big mainstream brands everyone's heard of, but they are, they really amazing products.
So I want to get your reaction to a phrase that gets bandied about a lot these days. Surveys are dead.
Not here, they're
What's your
not.
reaction
No,
to
they're
that?
not. No, they're not. No. Everyone, I mean, we all like a bit of like hyperbole, right? Like, surveys are dead. Everything's dead these days. We can't deny response rates are going down. Can't deny that only a quite small niche of customers is maybe answering surveys, but they're not dead. I mean, I come from a market research background. They're also an extremely valid and useful research tool, done properly, done well. I think the reality is, unfortunately, they're often not done well. So, I take surveys. It's really geeky, but I take surveys because I like picking them apart. And yes, unfortunately, they're just done so badly in a lot of cases and too long, and all the things we talk about. And I think, again, I could imagine here that we have a bit of a difference, in the countries, because I get the feeling that the US was ahead in terms of customer experience, in terms of their adoption of CX as a discipline. Maybe started sending more surveys. Maybe consumers in the US are, from what I understand, what people tell me, are inundated. I can't buy anything without getting a survey. And I get I can't remember, someone wrote to me recently, I'm getting 5 surveys a day. And that's, okay, maybe I also don't buy a lot of stuff, but I don't feel that. I here and there get a survey, and so I'm still open to answering them. And again, I see that a lot of voice of customer programs here in Germany are still very survey led. Do I think we should expand our definition of what voice of customer is and make sure that we're not just doing surveys? Absolutely. But I do see, as I say, companies who haven't had anything, have had no way of gathering feedback in any sort of robust, organized way. That's where they're starting out. And, at conferences, you see companies presenting, we've just set up our program, we've just set up our first survey, or our first collection of touchpoint surveys. And I don't think they're dissatisfied with them yet, in the way that in the US, but maybe it comes together, because maybe once you hit that part of maturity where everyone's mapping journeys and then putting listening posts everywhere and sending a survey after every transaction, maybe we'll get to that point in Germany too, but I feel we're not quite there yet. And I had a conversation a couple of years back with a company, and they were doing sort of long-term sort of financing for, I think, building projects. And so they said, our customer journey is really long, years, decades, I don't know. And they said, we've got really high response rates. We've got no problem, and they're stable, and people are happy to give us feedback. And I think there again, it comes to the engagement, doesn't it? Am I necessarily going to give a review for, I don't know, just something I bought on Amazon? And I know I bought some notebooks on Amazon. No, I'm not going to review that. Thanks very much, or do a survey or whatever. But if it's something really big and important to my life, or an experience that really affected me somehow, then maybe I will still. So I don't know. There's a lot of justification in this sort of dialogue around surveys are dead. I understand it completely, because it's not always implemented well, and certainly putting NPS in the wrong place. There's always stories, isn't it? There's one from the UK from a couple of years back where people saying, would you recommend this accident and emergency department at the hospital? But I'd rather not have landed there in the first place. I hope none of my friends or family end up there, because nonsensical places to apply it. Or there's that one that always goes around as a meme, doesn't it, online, about recommending, what is it, Microsoft, I don't know what it was like. No, because no one in the history of, recommending things has recommended, I don't know, PowerPoint. I can't remember what it was, but like there's, or
Any
Rocket,
Microsoft product, quite
yeah,
honestly.
operating system, or I can't remember. Like, it's just like, that's not how people work. So it's done badly a lot. And I understand probably survey fatigue probably is more of a thing, I think, over in the US compared to Europe, because probably you are getting more of them. So that's sort of logical, I suppose. Yeah, it would be good, if we were bringing in more sources of data. I mean, I worked for CloudBridge previously, and it was normal, for our customers to bring in multiple sources of data. We were one of the leaders, if not the leader at the time, text analytics in the customer experience space. We worked with all that unstructured feedback. So we brought in reviews and stuff from the contact center and social media, as well as, of course, open-ended things and surveys, open-ended comments. So yeah, I've seen it done, and it can be done. And I think a lot of companies are unsure how to go about it. But also the tools these days, I mean, dare I mention AI, but they've come on a
There, she said
long,
it, folks. She said it.
yeah, could we get through the whole podcast without saying it? No. It is opening up, that it's making it a lot more accessible, and sort of, there's kind of no excuse now for not doing more of it. And again, I do see that though and I don't know if it's Germany or Europe thing, I can't say, but I'm surprised sometimes how people are still sort of manually coding survey responses, for example. I kind of like the technology has been here long enough. We shouldn't be doing that anymore, I don't think. But I also have to say that, again, so much of this is the English speaking world kind of comes first, right? And so a lot of the solutions previously were very good in English and okay in other languages. And I think what's amazing now is that, like, thanks to AI, a lot of the other languages, the capabilities to do it in other languages is caught up in a way. I sort of previewed a survey tool recently. It's really interesting. It's like a voice survey platform. And I just asked them, like, can you do this in German? And they're just like, yeah, you just choose your language. And they just brought it up on screen, and they were like, how's that? Is that good? Like, did it translate that question well? And I was like, yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, we're getting to a point where those capabilities will be there in multiple, I mean, maybe already there, in multiple languages. So yeah, that was a very long answer, but no, survey is not dead, even if a lot of people would wish it to be dead. But it's not.
You brought up some things that I think are very interesting, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. Those relationships that you have with customers and kind of the trust that is built up over time can alter the way that we approach things from a CX perspective. So for instance, we know in the US that, a lot of people don't want to respond to surveys because we don't trust that the feedback is going to get used for anything useful anyway, right?
Yeah.
We're throwing a number out there, and you're going to report it with a big smile to some board. And that's all you care about, not about actually improving the experience. And I think if you are in a culture that is all about process improvement and driving improvements, which Germans very much, they love process improvement, that's for sure. And you have this trust built with your customers that the act of soliciting feedback is far more likely to come with honest feedback and more likely to drive change as opposed to just looking at a number. And I think that's part of the difference, as well as, in the US, like, we just get surveys for everything. And um, I can't speak for everyone because that would be very presumptuous, but I can tell you that I I get really frustrated by some of the surveys that I get. And it's because, just like you said, they come at the most awkward or unrealistic times where it's like, why would you even ask me that question? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And so when you execute with thoughtfulness and intention, I agree, surveys can be very powerful. There's also the B2B versus B2C aspect. Can you talk about that and how B2B is maybe different than B2C and why surveys might be even more valuable in that relationship?
Well, yeah, so this is interesting, right? So B2B, and here I took generally, I mean, not just about Germany, but in general, like B2B, so the relationship aspect is so much more important, right? It's not going to a supermarket or buying toothpaste or, you're talking about large sums of money invested in things maybe there's a lot relying on it. It's a long-term relationship, you're often signing up for several years or something, or I don't know, like, yeah, you're really reliant on, I don't know, yeah, that part or that software or whatever doing the thing it needs to do. And so like these like relationships are key. And then you've got this differentiation then in the B2B space of talking to the decision makers and the buyers where that relationship is. And then of course you still have like the end user or like the next part in the chain who then, yeah, picks up that thing and does something with it. And you've got to sort of get to both aspects of that. Surveys in the B2B space, my experience, things like response rates aren't brilliant, but the feedback you get can be incredibly thoughtful and specific and helpful because, it's important. It is important then in that space that you really are letting your customers know what you do with the feedback. If you don't close that loop, that communications part, you said, we did communications, you're missing something because you still need it very much to do that in the B2B space. But you do then get rewarded with I think decent feedback you can do something with. What I would say is that I think that going back to sort of also old-fashioned qualitative interviews with B2B, certainly decision makers and buyers, like you can't kind of replace that. You also have like win-loss surveys or interviews you can do, to understand, why you won a new customer or didn't get the deal, or indeed then at the end of the relationship what they've left. And so you've got these things, and I think an interview gives you the depth. And like, unlike maybe B2C where you've got to sort of incentivize people to give you anything more than a few minutes of their time, at least my experience in B2B is that they believe it's time well invested because they can really say what they think, and that it's part almost of the relationship is this ability to give some feedback. And sometimes that can be done from internal, like inside the company. And I think sometimes it's beneficial to get someone in from outside to do it because they can then really tell you what they think. I think something that muddies the water a bit came up at a conference recently, and I could only agree, is sometimes that relationship with an account manager can be really good. And we buy from company X and we really like our account manager there, she's brilliant. Maybe when there's some things we're not so happy about, but we don't want her to get into trouble because she's great, and I don't want anyone to think she didn't do a good job because she's fab. But actually we've got this and that issue. And so I think there again, yeah, it can be helpful to be able to sort of say, okay, well, get an external view on it, or get someone sort of completely separate, because certainly you don't want sort of cherry picking of, who are we sending for interviews, or who are we inviting, because that can, of course, happen then when you put together your survey list or your interview list. And various people get struck, and understandably, right? Oh no, we can't go out and survey them right now because they're in the middle of a renewal. Like, we don't want to upset anything. Off the list. And so you've got to be careful in a B2B space that you're not then selecting customers to talk to who you think are gonna tell you what you want to hear, and so on. But yeah, I think there's just so much mileage to get some really decent feedback there. And that can be really helpful if you've got surveys going, but obviously a survey doesn't tell you everything. And you have to be able to delve deeper sometimes. And I think in a B2B environment, then interviews are great for that. We see that in general as a topic in customer experience, right? Is realizing that however you go out and ask for feedback, that is in itself a touch point with your company that feeds into it. So, whether it's a survey, whether it's an interview, whatever it is, you've also got that. So it's not just something that happens after the experience. It can be part of it, right? And I think often that gets forgotten, and the survey is not it's the end of the experience. And if it's 20 minutes long and it feels inappropriate, that can not leave the best sort of final impression. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you speak a lot about the best way to approach this strategically is that if I'm going to get feedback, and that feedback can be survey, there could be other ways to get it, but I need to be getting ongoing feedback as opposed to just saying, okay, the transaction is over. Now I'm going to solicit feedback. And that's the only point at which that happens. That's a huge selection bias problem in understanding what your customers actually think and understanding what you do well and where you can improve. And by going at that, and you talk about, right, surveys done badly. I think that's why a lot of people sour on it, is because it's executed badly, right? And that can be bad questions. It can be, I don't have enough touch points, or I'm not doing it ongoing. Like, all of these things are important when you're considering how you want to gather feedback from your customers or potential customers or ex-customers, as you mentioned, right? Even the deals you lost can provide some incredible value if you ask and want to know why. I want to switch gears a little bit. I want to know if you are a sorter, and if you are a sorter, do you sort by color or by brick type? We're going into Lego questions now.
Yes, and I have to admire your beautiful models behind you. Am I a sorter? Well, weirdly, no. But I have noticed it. So when I run sessions with Lego Serious Play, so for people who don't know it, it's a workshop facilitation method where we swap pens and post-it notes, although they might be there too, but generally we swap that for Lego bricks. And you don't write down your answers, you build them with Lego. And I have noticed very much, people empty out. Often you'll start with a small, like to warm up, you start with a small bag. Everyone's got the same bricks. At least that's how I like to do it. And they'll empty out their little bag in front of them. And you can instantly see the sorters and the non-sorters. The sorters will immediately start organizing them by shade and by color. And I find it fascinating. I don't know what that says about people, but I find it interesting just to watch, because the room will definitely divide into those two camps. In the context of Lego, I feel like I should be. I'm the kind of person that will organize my books in kind of so that they're in height order, so that they look neat. I feel like instinctively I should be a sorter, but for Lego I'm not. And I think certainly for Lego Serious Play as a method, it's very intuitive. I mean, that's the idea, is that you think with your hands. That's kind of what we say. And so it's kind of like you just pick up the bricks and start building. Like, often, you'll get posed a question. So this is my job as a facilitator, is to pose a question that is kind of sufficiently unclear that there's sort of wiggle room, but where it's not so unclear you don't know what to build. But like, it'll be something like, I know one I did in a team workshop with my team back in Clark, which was something like, what superpower do you bring to the team? You think, okay, how do I build that in Lego? And some questions like people will instantly start building. They get an idea and we're sort of thinking in metaphors. So they'll instantly think, okay, that's easy. And off they'll start building. And then others will sit there, you can see they're sort of paralyzed and don't know what to build. And we always say, just start building. Like, literally pick up some bricks and just have something in your hand. Start putting something together, because the idea or the answer will come to you in doing that. Like, just believe me, like if you sit there and don't touch anything or try and write down an answer, that won't work. You must just trust your hands, as they say. And it's amazing because it works. And and you see people, they tentatively pick up a few things and then they add something, and maybe they put together quite a lot of bricks before they really know what they're building, but magically at the end of the 2 minutes or the 5 minutes or however long you give people, like, no, I've never had a situation where someone's not got anything to share, because it genuinely works. You just the idea will come to you, and it's not always. I think it's not always the. I know sometimes people are surprised, I think, by what they come up with, but that's the joy of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of the advice that people give to someone who's trying to write. Like, just start writing, and you'll figure it out. But if you don't start, then you'll never have a finished product. And so building, obviously, the sets that I've got on display are a very different purpose, right? They're built for display. They follow a very specific set of instructions. But I love taking an activity that is used one way and kind of flipping it on its head and using it to help both individuals and teams understand a little bit more about themselves and about each other. And I know that Lego Serious Play is a great way to accomplish that. I would also love to know, as someone who has now lived in Germany for nearly a decade, I don't want to make you feel old or anything, but it's been nearly a decade now.
Yeah.
What is your favorite German word and why?
You know what? That is a hard question. There are many amazing German words. And if anyone who isn't familiar with the German language should know that you can create your own words by simply gluing other words together. And that's how you end up with ridiculously long words also. I have to say, the word that just came into my head, the first word that came into my head is Purzelbaum, which is the word for like doing a roly-poly, like kids do, and I just think that's just a really, really, I don't know, it's just a cute word, Purzelbaum. Schmetterling is butterfly, and I think that's so lovely. I know it sounds like what it does, Schmetterling, it flutters around, and so the thing is, I mean, German language gets a bad press, doesn't it? People think it's all French is romantic and and then German. Like, a lot of people are very down on German as a language, and I find it beautiful. I understand you have to be able to speak it a bit and understand how it's put together. But then you realize how amazing it is, like how you can just kind of create words and invent words, and and you end up with words that have, say, three of the same letter in the middle. Often that can happen, because of this compounding of different nouns and things. So, no, it's a good question.
I ask because, I studied German for many years, and I have a love-hate relationship with the language. It is a language that you never know what's actually happening until the end of a sentence, because they like their verbs to be at the end, which is odd. to an English speaker. But I too love the fact that you can just smash words together to create new words that people understand basically what it means because of the words that you put together, instead of putting them into a sentence and describing things. The Germans are like, no, just put it all together. Let's just make one word, even if that word needs a line break in the middle to fit on the page. They're fine with it. It's great.
Yeah, you can have a lot of fun after this. Go away and Google longest German words, and you will find a fantastic collection of different ones. And yes, they're sending the verb to the end. Not only that, right? Separable verbs that you divide into two, and you only send half of it to the end. But depending on what that half is, it can completely change the meaning of the entire sentence. So yeah, you lots of funny translation stories can come out of that, where people are trying to sort of simultaneously translate, and you can't until you know what, or at least you have to guess what the end of the sentence might be. It's a fantastic language. It is a bit complicated, and people will probably notice from this podcast I sometimes start a sentence and then change my mind mid-sentence what I wanted to say, and so I just start again. And that doesn't really work very well in German because you can't follow at all what's going on. It's an interesting language. It can be a challenging language, but a friend explained to me one time the difference between kind of English and German, and so they said English is a language, like as a basis, you can get very far with actually very few words, and you can make lots of mistakes and still be well understood. But to really pass yourself off as like fluent and native, like we've got so many exceptions and fun, and just the fact that, you can have words like invalid and invalid, and it's the same word, and you just say it differently. And these things make things difficult, or place names. Britain is fantastic for that. Place names like Worcester and Leicester, and these are massively confusing, of course. Whereas German, it starts off, I think, the basis to have enough to make yourself understood, I think, is quite hard. And you've got the different, der, die, and das for the, and you've got it's difficult to start with. But the more you have, and the more you understand how it's put together, the easier it becomes. So I think that it's interesting, right? Like, and I think maybe that's, English is because it's spoken all over the world, and people do pick it up quite easily in a way that maybe German's harder to pick up, But once you've got to a certain level in German, it gets easier and easier because you understand how to create, how things work, how the structure of the language works, and honestly, it's a lot more forgiving. I still get my ders and d's and das's mixed up all the time, but you can understand.
Well, if they weren't changing all the time, for those of you that don't know anything about German, just know that genders are fluid in German, actually. And that's just a feature of the language. So there you go. Frances, thank you so much for joining me on Next in Queue. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been lots of fun. Thank you.
Next in Queue is produced by me, Rob Dwyer. Theme music is courtesy of Big Red Horse. If you enjoyed this episode, please share with at least one person. Word of mouth is the best way for people to discover new content. And thanks for listening.